know why. We've got a name for it. We may even, the pharmaceutical industry may have created a drug for it. We may have a procedure for it, but we don't really know why it happens. So the symptoms may get a disease. We may have to even get another pill for side effects. The new thought is, look, what if we gave the body what it needed to function optimally? And there's this concept of, well, good enough versus optimal. And this is, like I say, there's a difference between a deficiency state and that's an obvious situation. But maybe life is more of a spectrum. And if we need to optimize certain systems for people to work the very best, especially for their brains to work as well as possible, then maybe that's what we should be focusing on. The wellness industry is a relatively new thing in medicine. It's completely consumer-driven, relatively new. I mean, it used to be that's all there was. Maybe a few hundred years ago, you either stayed well or there wasn't a lot that medicine at that time could do for you. But this is a consumer-driven industry. This is driven by people asking, yes, but why? Yes, but why? Is there something we can do that's going to take care of the original problem rather than just give me a blood pressure pill and me know that I'm going to have to take blood pressure pills for the rest of my life? It's focused on optimizing entire systems. And I don't mean just cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal. I mean the detoxification systems throughout the body, not just in the liver. Antioxidant systems present throughout the body. Optimizing the energy supply to any given tissue. We're going to look at blood, oxygen, cofactors that have to be there. In the digestive system itself, which is, it covers more than just digestion. It covers the immune system. The most active immune component in your body is probably your digestive system. We have to have a balance of the favorable germs. We have to be able to absorb nutrients. So we're going to, wellness looks at all this, and we're going to touch on each of these and a lot more in our talk tonight. So let's look at brain function. What are we looking at? Does someone have a mood disorder? Is their default emotion anger? Do they have a tendency toward depression? What about someone with hallucinations or schizophrenia? Or what about just on the other end of the spectrum, just a little bit of cloudy thinking, just hard to think really clearly? What about ADD, ADHD, or even a situation as extreme as autism, which it turns out now we're recognizing is a spectrum as well? When we're looking at brain function, what about the so-called hopeless addict, the hopeless alcoholic? Is this really just a situation of nutrient imbalance or a suboptimal situation? I feel like I have to give a word about genetics here because to me this is really exciting. To me, 10 years ago when they talked about mapping the human genome, it was a little worrisome, I think, to a lot of people. Oh, the insurance companies are going to find out what's going to kill us and they won't insure us. And it turns out that's complete poppycock, hogwash. First of all, we had a lot of surprises. And actually, there's nothing to stop the insurance companies from doing things like that. But for thinking people, what we need to pay attention to is what about our situation or the hand that we were dealt, how best can we play that hand rather than, my genes have given me a death sentence and I'll die at age 50 of a heart attack. And no, what can we do to alter that so that we can play the best quality and the longest hand that we possibly can with the hand we've been dealt? So the human genome has been completely mapped. They've done both chromosomes for one person, mapped it all out. We found a lot fewer genes than we actually expected, roughly 10% of what we expected. We thought there would be about, around 200,000 genes. Turns out there are only about 20,000 actual genes. And the bottom line is actual genetic diseases are rare, much less than 1% of the burden of diseases, if you can think of it that way. There are definite genetic diseases, cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, muscular dystrophy, hemochromatosis, that's an iron storage problem. They exist. They have a certain history, medical history associated with them, certain complications known to occur with them, and you can still optimize the health of any of those individual people. So I think, I feel like sort of the medical education I got in conventional medicine was somewhat hopeless. I mean, when you can tell someone the only thing they can hope for is a procedure. Arthritis, for example. Oh, the only thing we can do for you is replace your knee if it gets bad enough. We'll give you an artificial knee. That, to me, I just found myself going, is that the best we can do? Can't we do a little bit better than that? And the answer is I've learned through looking actually at the literature, the answer is absolutely we can do better than that. So when we get into genetics, we now discover if there's only 20,000 genes, that sort of sets the stage for this concept of what's multifactorial. That means there's more than one gene involved. And there's an entire new branch of genetics called epigenetics, which transliterates, upon the genes. And the concept is, what determines which genes get turned on and turned off? It's incredibly important. It's much more important than what the underwriters think is important, okay? This is what's important. It is heavily influenced by our habits, by are we exercising, what are we thinking, how are we thinking, our nutrition. And in fact, as you'll see, the nutrition may actually adversely affect how you're thinking and how you're feeling, so you don't feel like exercising. So, there's a number of things that play into this, and it's important to understand everything that you're doing makes a difference. Every positive thought helps. Every nutritive substance you're putting into your body, assuming it's helping balance things and not worsen an imbalance, is going to be helpful. The last thing to understand is cell turnover gives us a body, the most conservative estimate, every 10 years you have a new body. You have to understand your cells are growing, they're dividing, they're morphing, they're changing. These genes are getting turned on and turned off, and you want to live your life and focus on wellness in such a way that every new generation of cells has the chance to be healthier than the last generation of cells. Now, I wanted to include a little excerpt here because this is fun to look at. Now, part of this may sound like a talk on addiction medicine, and I don't mean it to be that way, but I think we can learn a lot. If life is a spectrum, I think we can learn a lot from looking at the extremes, and sometimes we can make useful comparisons to what we ourselves may be experiencing or people we know. So there's a story told, and I'll mention this book again later, and it's included in my resource slide at the very end, so you don't have to write it down now. Kathleen DeMaison wrote a book called Potatoes Not Prozac, and in that book she tells a story of these mice. These mice were specifically bred to prefer alcohol and sugar. And it's, preferential to food and water. They were bred to prefer that. So they would, find whichever mice went for the sweets first, and they would breed those in with the other mice that went for the sweets. And eventually got a strain, they called it C57. These C57 mice actually had a very intense reaction to sweets, alcohol, and narcotics. And I'll talk about that later. Those are all specific triggers for the beta-endorphin system. And I'll talk about what that means, but just for now, just understand they reacted differently to sweets, alcohol, and narcotics than the other mice they were compared to, which were called DBA. And the DBA were just, your average Joe mouse, okay? They could just say no. They didn't, whether it was sweetness or alcohol or regular chow, they didn't really have a preference. So what we learned watching these mice is in reaction to a stress or a threat, the DBAs look for an escape, while the C57s, the one that are bred for their preference for alcohol, they crouch, they become immobile and defensive. And it even has a name. It's called defeat-induced learned submission. And guess what? It occurs in response to beta-endorphin that's released in their brain. These defeated mice eventually develop a tolerance to the beta-endorphin released in response to a threat. And interestingly, also when withdrawing from morphine, these C57 mice become lethargic and passive. I mean, just the extreme of some withdrawal situations. So when we compare that, you may know people that react to situations that way. You know people that may seem to have an unusual response to alcohol. They have a certain personality, then they drink a drink, and they're sort of different. And I think we can learn something useful from these mouse experiments because the scientists don't make any moral judgments about the mice. They just know they have completely different chemistry. And we may know some human equivalents. So this may be fun to look at and see, just useful, practical. What can we learn from this? So we're going to talk about the optimal requirements the brain requirements for optimal function, and you can see it's a pretty long list, and I will keep showing this slide, and you will see highlighted what we're going to talk about next, so you can follow through as we're